Hello, my name's Oscar Clark, and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast, a community of amazing people who love talking about and sharing their love of the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. As your host, I am here on a podquest, to understand everything you want to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And today I am delighted to be joined by my co-Game Dev London host, Adam. I'm going to bring him up on screen. Adam, how are you doing? Lovely to see you. In case anyone doesn't know who you are, do you want to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everyone. My name is Adam. I am one of the co-hosts of Game Dev London, also one of the co-founders. So you see me lurking in the Discord, banning spam bots and that kind of thing. I also run my own studio called Beta Jest up in the north of England, where I do games programming and games design, as well as all the assorted indie things of wearing lots of hats and doing far too many jobs.
Hats is good, and obviously I do a whole bunch of things. My primary thing is CEO of Fundamentally Games as a living game publisher, but as an aside, I also do a whole bunch of outreach to try and help other game devs. And Adam, it was nice to have you on a kind of acceleration program we had up in Leeds not that long ago. Kind of a kind of fun thing to have you with your indie, and I know you're so brilliant. You're on this thing, and it's like cool. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I think is really interesting about the process for me is always trying to kind of learn from other devs and compare experiences and share. And one of the topics we thought we'd talk about today is resilience. So, I mean, Adam, tell me a little bit about what you think about that term and what it means to you. Is it just a term used by investors who don't want to give you money yet? Or is there something more to it? Is there something that are more fundamental? I mean, I think there's something about character. There's something about practicalities. I mean, but enough about me. What do you think?
Resilience is one of those words that it's very easy for, like you said, for people to kind of attach a lot of meaning to it. And essentially what at its core, I think it kind of means the ability and or capacity to take on hardship, essentially, to deal with the circumstances that you are presented with especially when they are either negative or have some negative attributes to them. And this is key for anybody kind of working in anywhere in the games industry, because it won't always be positive. It's not always happy. Sometimes work is tough. Sometimes projects.
Say it's not so. Game dev is amazing.
sometimes things drop into, everything has as peaks and troughs. Sometimes it's great and sometimes it's difficult. And resilience it's not about sticking it out regardless, which is the danger, is that people hear resilience and think, oh, I must keep going, whatever. It's about an understanding of when to weather the storm, but also when to go, actually, we need to maybe we need to call it, or maybe we need to approach this in a different way. It's about an awareness and a smartness in those tough situations to be prepared to do what is necessary, whether that's continuing onwards or stopping, depending on the situation you're faced with.
So it kind of sounds like you're saying that you have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. I'm kind of going to the gambler here, very dangerous territory. I think that's a really important point, actually. One of the things about that for me is one of the things I think I learned most in the last few years, pre-pandemic started this journey for me, was hyper-casual games. And in particular, realizing I had this sudden moment. It's like, no, they're not just like simple games. I mean, some people think they're terrible games. I don't. I think I can see why some people don't like them. But actually, it's not just about the simplicity. It's not just about shoving ads in people's faces. It's actually, in my opinion, about working out how to make bets better, smarter, faster, and to kill things quicker.
Yep.
And for me, that's a really interesting kind of different way of looking at this resilience question. It's like, if I can work out where the roadmaps are the bumps on the road are likely to be, if I can actually have more choices, if I can make smarter decisions earlier, because I'm smarter, meaning not that I'm smarter, but meaning that I'm basing that information on, I'm kind of closing down the questions quicker. I think that's the way to look at it. So I think one part of resilience is closing down the questions quicker. The other part of resilience is having the ability to pivot, backup plans, alternative streams of revenue potentially. Kind of knowing what it looks like to be able to deliver an experience smartly.
I think
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think a good way to actually put it then, actually, I think the thing that I said before counts in, but a good way to think about it may be hard to be knocked down, I think is a good way to put it. And because it's not just about being resilient in the moment, which is definitely true. You need to, if you're faced with that difficulty, being resilient, but it's also resilience is a form of preparedness, exactly to your point, that the more prepared you were beforehand by considering the options, looking at the situation, analysis, and preparedness, you will appear to be resilient at the time because you'll get through things, you'll weather storms, that's my metaphor of the day today, you'll weather storms, and you'll be able to face up to challenges because you were prepared for them. You will appear resilient, but actually what you're being is just being smart and being prepared so that when those things come, you already had those things in place. And resilience is just the manifestation of your ability to go, I can see what's coming, I know what's going to be there, and I'm ready for it when it comes.
So basically, you're saying proper planning and preparation prevents piss poor performance, as the phrase goes. Oh, sorry, I couldn't resist that one. But I think that's true. I mean, preparation is part of it. I think having a backup plan is an important part. I think having, if you've got additional revenue streams potentially, I think that's also a really kind of important aspect to that. It's hard to kind of get your head around, but I think there's definitely something about that. But I think it even comes down to, there's a phrase I end up using a lot, which is opinions firmly felt but loosely held. I think that's an important part. I kind of joke that I don't know if I can work with someone until I can have a row with them.
Yeah, I can see that.
And some people take that wrong. And I don't mean that I want to be in an aggressive environment. I don't want to be in an aggressive environment, full stop. I'm not interested in being in an aggressive environment. I've been there. It's called telcos. When you're at the sharp end of a sales team in an advertising company, not always the most salubrious of environments, shall we say. But no dissing any particular kind of groups at all, by the way. There's just different cultures, different things. But I think there's something about the ability to be able to have firm conversations, to be able to present your arguments, to be able to make a case, but to realize that you have to listen at the same time. And, the trouble with creative things, and I have a real problem when I think I've done something really clever, and I may have actually done something clever, and it gets pulled because there's a minor thing, and the minor thing is probably enough to pull it. But what I struggle with is when they haven't got the point of the action, or where they haven't got why that was the smart thing to do. And I often find it very frustrating where, for example, you often get things like you put some background music in the background and you talk, and someone doesn't like that because they don't like the combination of background music and voice. I don't care if you don't like it. I care that it does the job.
Yep.
Now, sometimes it's the right thing, and I have to accept that, and it's part of the resilience process of taking knowing the things you're going to lose, so knowing the things that, as much as you might be right, much as you might be wrong, you sometimes have to let things go. And I'm terrible about that whenever it's creative. But you've got to recognize your biases, I think, at the same time. So I don't know, I'm rambling a bit now, but I mean, hopefully I'm getting across the idea that there's an emotional component to this resilience, which is knowing you're going to have to take a few knocks.
I think, on that point, I think, sorry, but yeah, I think trust is a very good form of resilience, which is exactly the kind of thing you're alluding to there, which is like, so when I started Beta Jester, one of the reasons that there's three of us as co-founders, was that there will always be a majority, regardless of the situation. And sometimes, I trust my other co-founders completely in terms of those situations. So when a situation arises where I believe a thing is the best course of action, and those two believe that it is something different, unless there is a very fundamental reason why, like I'm like, it's going to cause this much damage or this many problems, I can prove that. If it's a more general thing where I just think I'm right and they think they're right, if it's 2 versus 1, I'll concede, because I go, I trust that both of you have done your research. I trust both of you have the best intentions of the company at heart. I trust your judgment. I will accept this. Also, not only because I accept all that, but also because I know it will go the other way another day, and I will be in the 2 and you will be in the 1. And I trust that in those situations, you will also concede fairly and go and trust in me. And that's a form that will appear as resilience, because I am resilient to being wrong, essentially. Which is, it can be difficult for people to accept that position and go, you know what, fair enough. But the more, and I think this is coming to your point as well, the more you faith you have in those around you, the more you have, whether it's a system or a process or a project or a person, and the more you are able to trust them to be right and accept that you, not necessarily that you're wrong, but trust their decision over yours because of whatever reason, might be majority or they have, they're in charge or something. Then
it maybe it's their role, and I mean, I might have more experience in that particular role, but I've hired that person
precisely
because that's their job.
Yeah.
And if I can't let them do their job, then they will never be able to do their job. They will never be able to learn. And my job is to try and provide them with the framework to function. But if I start doing their job for them, what was the point?
You could almost say that resilience is like a prepared, intentional form of vulnerability, where your resilience comes from your acceptance of vulnerability because you can trust those around you. In the same form that, like, delegating. If I hired somebody in who does the same things that I can do, but I hired them in so that I could delegate some of the work to them, being able to go, okay, this company is going to expand because I can give my work to that person, is a form of long form resilience. You're building resilience into your studio by having more people who can do the job, that are trusted to do the job and perform at the quality level. And that comes in the form of vulnerability, because you having to accept that delegation and accept that you personally are not going to be the one doing it. But it works out as resilience because the studio is then more flexible and more ready to deal with the circumstances that crop up.
No, completely. And I think I think the other thing is that I think it's not just about, I was right, you were wrong. It's actually about learning to trust the process to a certain extent. And it's also that if you just hold on tightly and try to control everything, you end up A, not learning, B, when you can't discover something that you didn't know. You can't discover a new thing has changed, therefore the thing that didn't used to work suddenly works. And why? It's one of the reasons why I think diversity is such an important part in hiring. I mean, I keep trying to get this across, and I'm not sure if I kind of over talk about it, but for my mind, I want to have as few people who look the same in the room as possible. I don't mean that, I'm not going to not hire somebody who's a cis white male if they are the right person for the job. But if I am presented with 2 identical people, one of whom is not a cis white male, I am going to probably to them if all other things are equal. But that's not just about the gender identity, whatever else it might be. It's also about educational background, cultural context. It's about all of the variables that allow somebody to come to me and say, this is the way I look at things. And I think without perspective, it's a bit of a cliche in some ways. I believe in trying to build learning cultures. I think maybe because I've sat in telcos and they've used the word learning culture, and it can sound like, an excuse to fire people, or whatever it might be. It can be quite controlling in some organizations because they're large and they're big and they're dealing with many millions of dollars. And I can see why it happens. But I think that if you're building a small team, you've got to be able to make sure that every single action you do is going to contribute to every single next action you do. And if you're just telling people what to do and you're not listening and you're not paying attention and you're not changing and you're not accepting, if you're not holding on to ideas firmly but loosely, then that combination, I think, really makes it super important. Anyway,
well,
what else
on that,
though? We talked. Yeah,
on that point, just very quickly, sorry, there's a very key thing you brought up there, which is if you know, and it comes back to the panel that we did at Game Development at EGX about the importance of diversity, which is if you take away the moral side of it, which is that it's an important thing anyway, just for the moment, which I fundamentally believe in, it's that a resilient. One of the things I say to a lot of people is you don't, and you know, a lot of people say you don't know what you don't know. And as to our point, as we've talked about, a resilient anything is one that is prepared for any outcomes. The more situations it's prepared for, the more things it takes into account, the better. And a decision that you make, and I said, and it's another thing that I say a lot of things. Another thing that I say is, give me all the information and I can make a decision. And if I make a decision with all the information, then I can be happy with that decision, even if it goes wrong. But if I make a decision and I'm missing information that somebody could have provided me, then I will feel like the decision could have been made better and I've made a mistake. And to do that, you need the benefit of having a diverse team and an inclusionary team is that you will have more people who can give you the information that you don't know. You will have more people who can answer the questions that you may even know are relevant to what's being asked of you. And the more prepared you are for that situation, the more resilient your decision will be to the problems that could occur. Because there are, exactly your point, there are cultural aspects, there are lived aspects, there are, just things people have experienced in their life or opportunities they've faced or hardships they've faced that mean that when that question turns up that's relevant to it, they go, oh, have you taken this into account? And the answer might be that you have, or that your decision you were going to make does cover that anyway. But unless you intentionally or it was brought to the fore to go, that's a very good point, you don't know that. And if you don't know that, you could decide something that a month, 2 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line may come back and kick you because you didn't take it into account, because you had no one in your team who could have taken it into account because you weren't prepared for that eventuality. And this is why diversity is so important.
I mean, like I said, I'll even have people on the team who've never played No Man's Sky.
So they don't know, and they don't know.
I don't know. But I mean, joke aside, I mean, so we're talking about resilience in the sense of like personal resilience and the kind of team culture thing. I think that's incredibly important. I think asking questions, essentially as part of that is great. But I think there's other sort of functional, like practical things that we ought to consider in terms of what resilience is. I mean, so for example, you do work for hire stuff. You're moving into doing more IP stuff. I mean, as somebody who's done consultancy for years, I mean, the ability to be able to have somebody give you money to do a job is fantastic, because it means that I can make sure I can still pay my team to do the other things that need to be done. The trouble is, does that distract you from being able to do the thing you want to do? And where is that balancing act between the I have to get the money in versus the I have to get this job done? Because if I don't get this job done, then this game won't get out. And if this game doesn't go out, then this company can't move forward. Do you see where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. What do you sit on that?
It's very much in this kind of situation where, and I use this word, I've used this word a lot in the last year, which is being intentional, which is that in a lot of cases, the decision that you make doesn't matter. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's that it doesn't matter which you pick over the other, as long as the reasons for which you picked it were solid. So, for example, work for hire can very easily detract from everything else you're doing because your commitment to your clients has to come first and foremost. And vice versa. Making a game can be really important to you because it gets you a revenue streams and recurring income. It doesn't really matter which one, if you dedicate yourself to both or either, or try and walk the fine tightrope of the balance gap between the two, as long as you pick the one you want to do intentionally and accept the consequences that come with it. The worst case scenario is to not pick because you will be forced into one or the other slots. And if it's not the one you wanted, you may be 3, 4, 5, 10 years down the line and go, this isn't what I wanted to do. And the danger there is the wasted time. But
also the danger is you've got probably, if you've got investors in particular, they have an
yeah.
expectation, and you've got a responsibility to respond to their expectations. And how do you square that circle?
No, nothing makes you make intentional decisions very quickly, like having to demonstrate to a third party why you decided to do that. For sure, the moment somebody's going to look through and be like, "Why did you do that?" You need to go. You can't be going, "We just didn't decide, and then it just kind of happened." That's not a good answer to any question.
No.
So yeah, it's about the when we first set up a long time ago, we had a sort of mentor of ours who had done a work for hire game studio before pretty successfully say to us, you can do work for hire or you can make a game, but you can't do both because you will never be able to focus fully on one or the other. And at the time I was like, we'll do it and it'll be fine. And we have done a very good job of striking that balance. But by that same token, we have not been able to dedicate as much time to making our own IP as we may have wanted to previously. But we chose stability as our marker of, let's say resilience, essentially. The thing that we were going to be was stable. The thing that we were going to be was exist. And from that existence and stability, we would build and build and layer until we got to a point where we could do stuff. And because that was our driving factor, it's been over 7 years and we are still here as an indie studio, where we have seen indie studios both work for hire and going straight for the games studios that have fallen away because they've gone for something before they were ready to, or something's fallen through and they had nothing prepared in the background, or something's happened that may not have been their fault, but it was the risk of that thing falling away wasn't taken into account. And then it's cut them, unfortunately, at the wrong moment. And, I'm not going to sit here and say that that couldn't have happened to us. It absolutely could have done. And we've had some very, near misses and escapes. But because we always factored in stability into all of the decisions that we've made, we know that we were prepared for those situations. And when they turned, we were more resilient to the consequences of difficult times than had we just kind of gone, well, we'll make it work, we'll figure it out, we'll just, we'll slam it together. Because then when those moments came up, if we weren't prepared, if we were very just kind of jolly about it and just hoped, we could have just absolutely cut down. I mean, how do you prepare for a pandemic? You don't, right? It turns up and you have to hope that you're ready for it. But we made a decision to basically focus entirely on work for hire because that was our stability. And doing that allowed us to go through that period and come out and still be here. When we know that has, unfortunately, that time has hurt a lot of studios and shut them down. And I'm not saying, again, like I'm saying, it's not that we were perfect and it's not that it wasn't difficult or that it couldn't, something could have gone wrong and we could have been cut down, but we were more resilient to it because of that decision that we'd made 7-8 years ago.
I think one of the things that's helped me in that kind of circumstances is not going for a particular project or piece of work or doing anything without having more than one positive outcome. So looking for when I've got a choice between things, I want to make sure there's a couple of ways of looking at it. First is obviously don't just take it for the money. What am I going to learn? How is it going to improve my network? How is it going to improve my reputation? How is it going to put me in a better position to understand something that the game that I'm actually wanting to get out is going to be? How is it going to push other things forward? How do you make sure that by doing that action, all boats rise? I think without having that mindset of all boats have to rise, you shouldn't be. If it doesn't do that, you shouldn't be doing that thing. More or less.
It comes back actually to just very quickly. It comes back actually to something that you discussed in previous podcasts, which is that at the very core of your game, if you're making a game, is you probably need a few decisions that are relatively sacrosanct, things that you're not going to sacrifice in pursuit, because those constraints are what is going to guide your decision making as you move forward, because you refer back to them. And as long as you keep the game pure to that core, that heart, you make a better game because the part of it stays pure, essentially. And it's a very similar setup where when you've got it doesn't matter too much within reason what the decision is, what the core is, what that beating heart of it is. as long as it's, you're all happy with it and it works for you and it's a good setup, if you can make decisions then relative to that and keep true to that and not, go off down too far off the wrong track or whatever it may be, it's a lot easier to be prepared for the things to come because you've taken them into account in line with those decisions. And it lines up in both game development as a game and as a studio or as an individual when you do that.
I think it's interesting you put it that way, because I think you actually went in the same direction I was going to go, because there's another way of looking at that, and that is, in fact, a lot of people call what you're describing game pillars. I don't like pillars.
That's why I avoided saying it.
Yeah.
That's avoid you shouting.
I don't like game pillars. The reason, just so people know, I don't like game pillars because I think game pillars are stuck in the ground, and I want them to be vectors. So I look at it a bit like my kind of classic way of looking at it is think about it like vision is basically like Neverland. It's straight second star to the left and straight home till morning. So it is a direction, it is not a thing. And when the trouble with pillars is they're typically a kind of, well, again, I'm being a bit unfair and it's splitting hairs, but a pillar is normally, we're going to have this thing, it doesn't change, it's solid and it's there. I don't want that. I want to know, how is that going to help me make a decision? It's the direction that implies that I'm after, not the position itself, because I know sacred cows stop you from delivering great experiences. But to your point, you need something to hold on to. You need some integrity, some kind of solidity to the whole process. And the way I try and do that is I try to define what success looks like, and I try and put a KPI to it. Now, if that success is I'm going to win awards, which by the way I don't, I never have, that's a KPI. Okay, what then? Because that's a direction. If that's my direction, what is the thing that is going to make me win awards? How does that imply the actions and choices I then have to make? If it's about making money, okay, so then what is the actions and choices that then has to some really simple stuff I think is often quite useful to chuck in the mix there. Like, if I am going to make a game and I want to make it have 120% ROAS, day 30 ROAS, that means in 30 days, if I spend 10 grand, I have to have people spend 12 grand to get 120 day 30 ROAS. That's only 20% extra than I spent getting those people. Now, obviously, there's retention and all that kind of stuff to make money. But when you start then thinking, okay, that means I need to get 10% of them spending £12. That suddenly really locks down in a really hard way what I'm trying to do, and really forces me to think really hard about what's going on. I think framing your problems clearly as kind of directors of your direction. Oh, that's not a very good way around it. But KPIs that you use to direct yourself allows you to, again, think like if you're sailing, maybe sailing is probably a good example. Are you going to tackle jibe? The wind is in the direction the wind is in. The data is what the data is. How do I tackle jibe around the obstacles that the data, the winds of the data is pushing me into? The data might be, I'm running out of money. The data might be, I find my audience isn't getting me the 40% day one retention I'm hoping for. The data might be that there's been a sudden kind of change in the rules in China. Data might be that there's some outburst about battle passes, and suddenly loot crates aren't seen very nicely, and therefore what am I going to do about it? Well, these are the things to me. It's like, if you hold on to a KPI doesn't have to be affected by that wind. We can use that KPI and say, okay, so with that situation, how do we keep moving forward, but now we change direction to be able to accommodate for it?
It's very if you try and think about it in terms of relating it to pillars, actually, it's the difference between a game designed for now and a game designed for tomorrow. It's present and future, in so much as that if you to take a comparison of, say, a pillar to a direction. And I also think that one of the problems with pillars is often we link them to a part of the game. So, let's say, we're going to make this, I I don't know. Let's say we're going to have sailing in our game. That's it. I've decided we're making a sailing game. To full stop. And that's okay. It's not, it's perfectly reasonable. But the question is, and this comes back to one of your points, why? Why are you making a sailing game? What's the point? What is the thing about the sailing game that made you go, we're making a sailing game? And it might be that you go, sailing is cool. Great. So that's not actually that you want a sailing game, is that you want your game to be cool. And sailing is your implementation of that. And that's fine. That's not a problem. But then use coolness as we want our game to be cool. That is what you're going for. So that tomorrow, when the issue comes up and someone, and somebody comes to you with this idea of, the concept of, let's say, sailing in different textures. I don't know. It's a weird example, but you look at it and you play an example of it and you go, oh, this is great. And something about it feels awesome. That could be okay. But then
I think there's a big indie pitch recently, I think maybe in Helsinki, where the whole thing was basically an ocean that came and went. The tide came and went over a 7-day period, and you repeated it. And they did all sorts of crazy stuff with waves and stuff like that. But they had a reason for it. They had the waves were worse at certain points of the period of the cycle of the game, and better, easier at other points. And they made a feature, an experience of the point of them having waves. And I know I'm picking on this because you mentioned waves, but this idea that they didn't just stop at the idea we're going to have waves. They went, okay, what does the wave do? How does it change gameplay? How does it affect? They asked a bunch of questions. I mean, there's a technique called the 5 whys. I didn't make this up. This exists out there. Just Google it. The idea is to keep asking the question. Don't accept the first answer for a pillar or an identity or a direction, whatever it is. But ask yourself why. Why should I care? Who cares?
Yep.
And if you can't answer that and keep answering that, you haven't got the answer. You haven't got the right detail.
And the big danger with that, especially, is that if you don't dive into the core, what you may solve is a symptom, but not the problem. And if you solve a symptom, you may not only will you not have fixed the issue, you may have created more problems. And that's the real thing. You will. And so take another example of that, I would take. I don't know the answer to this following question, which is Rocket League, which is obviously a wonderful game and I love it. Was built off the back of a previous game called Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket Powered Battle Cars. And I like to continue to be one of the few people who can remember the full title as a SSAR.
I'm very impressed. I would never have remembered.
But the big thing with Supersonic, I'm just going to call it Supersonic for now. I can't even call it that because it's Supersonic Rocket, the previous game, was that it was very, very similar to Rocket League, but it was very floaty and it was very imprecise, I think is part of it. And actually, if you look at the two games, you go, but this is basically the same game. But I imagine, and I would assume, that what they said when they had that game, they saw a very calm, competitive scene starting to appear from it, is they went, that's what we want. We want to make a competitive version of this game. Or we want a game that can be played competitively around the world. Or we want one that people feel like they have control over the game. And when they drove down to those core aspects, far beyond just, we want to make a sequel that does stuff. Because it's very easy they could have done a sequel and they could have added, weird race tracks, or they could have added, gone straight for 4,000 different sports. But when Rocket League first released, it was the same. Except so finely tuned in terms of the mechanics that you felt in control of that car, that you could perform how you wanted to perform. And what that meant was, even though the sequel wasn't that different, that it exploded alongside very clever marketing and use of PlayStation Plus and all that kind of thing too.
Yeah.
But the reason they could do that is because what they got back from players in testing was such, enjoyment of, they had this control over this car and could perform like they wanted to, that they had been able to take a less directed approach and drive it down to the heart and create something wonderful, even though it was a very similar game, because they gave themselves a direction. Exactly your point. If the pillar had just been make a rocket-powered flying RC car football game, they've already done that. So what is it that they're actually driving for?
So I think there's a couple of things that you're untangling there. One is simplification. I think we often try to make too big a thing. In fact, always. Now,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. I am of the design school where I throw everything at the wall, and then I try to get rid of everything and see what's left. Now, I think that's a perfectly valid thing to do. I am sometimes a little bit cautious at giving things up, which I should have done more often. But I find that once I rip the band-aid off, it's okay. I find a way to make it work. The other side, so simplicity. What's the phrase? A design is not done when there's nothing left to add. A design is done when there's nothing left to take away.
That's a good one.
Love that one. On top of that, though, there's also, I think, a couple of other things about the player, realizing that actually what we're doing is we're trying to find an audience who we are trying to take through emotional journeys, whatever those emotional journeys are. And actually, if we don't design against the psychology, the emotion of the player, we're wasting our time. And that is, I think there's something about that resilience that is really about actually understanding what the hell you're doing as a company and who you're doing it for. I think often we talk about audiences as, they're people like me. I play first-person shooters. That's not an audience. No, that's a hobby. You're making a game for yourself. Is that important?
Even then, why are you making it for yourself? And this is especially as you develop, and this is going out to a lot of people, especially you develop making games and look at them, and the longer you go on and the more you do them, it just comes back to the 5 whys again, and it comes back to really reflect on why, because making a game that you want to play is not inherently a problem, and it'd be cool, and it's going to drive you to understand what you're doing, but you cannot think that you're making this game because you want to play it, because what you want to play is extremely variable. Unless you are a person who's only ever played one very specific type of game your entire life, which is, if we find them, let's test them.
Well, I meet them a lot, and it's called FIFA. That's the only.
Yeah.
Another demographic is Candy Crush or Words with Friends or that kind of thing. But sorry, I'm being mean.
But the point is going, why do you play that game? And for example, if take FIFA as a very good example, if you go, I'm a person who only plays FIFA and I want to make a FIFA game, you go, okay, well, why do you only play FIFA? Is it because you love football? Is it because you love the fact that it's the branded one? Does that mean what you want is a branded game? Does that mean what you want is a football game? Is it the football or is it the team sport? Because if it was, say, a hockey game, would that be a problem? And people don't. Sometimes they just start at the surface and don't dig down. And this is, and again, we're circling around the whys point. The point is that the more stones you unturn, the deeper you dig, the more why questions you ask, and the sooner you get to a point where you can't, the real fundamentals of why you're doing something, the more resilient that you can build your idea, because it gives you that power to go, I know why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I love the experience of being sociable in a sports environment. Great.
Yeah.
Or if you build all your decisions on that core concept of why you do that, you're going to have a better game than I like FIFA.
So we kind of covered a bunch of stuff so far. So we've talked about preparation and understanding. We've talked about using kind of strategies as vision, as vectors, as directions. We've talked about asking the 5 whys, and we've also talked about choosing projects and actions based on more than just the money. Always having 2 things that you get out of something. I think there are a couple of other practical techniques we can chuck in here. The first thing that comes to my mind is what I call a pre-mortem. I love pre-mortems, and I so rarely actually get around to doing them. And so it's one of those things where I kind of wish I did more of, but never really find the time. So for reference, a pre-mortem is I basically sit down with a group of people in a room with a whiteboard, Miro, whatever it might be. I'm a massive fan of things like Miro. I use them all the time. Anyway, and we sit down and say, right, the game has failed. Why? So we start with the assumption that the game has failed, and we work backwards to work out why. And it is amazing what you find out. It's amazing what you think of. And often we actually do this with real data as well. So we look at, where do people churn? Okay, so we look at the pathway. We look at the kind of funnels in reverse to see how people fail. But it's something more functional, particularly with live ops, I think. where, okay, was it the server falling down? Was it there was a patch release from Epic and therefore no one could actually upgrade the game anymore? Was it that I don't know, the people decided they didn't like top hats anymore? You know, you pick out a whole bunch of things, and some of them are crazy, some of them are intentionally crazy, some of them. And then you kind of work out, okay, these are the patterns of things we think could go wrong. What would have caused those things in the first place? What were the things that we could have done that would have meant we could have had a check and balance to prevent us falling into that particular trap? What I think is marvelous about doing that is that what you end up with is process. Now, the reason I talk about process is because I think you talked earlier about partnership and trust being an important part of resilience. I'm very lucky that I've got Ella, and Ella's fantastic at kind of process, and we sit and I'm good at kind of coming up with the concept of process. Ella is really good at working out what's wrong with my process and then turning that into practical steps that we can redo, actually deliver on those things. And so having a kind of like being able to use the part of my brain that's good at creativity and her being able to use the part of her brain that is really good at process. And by the way, we're both good at both things, but a combination together allows us to come up with, you know, core checklists of what you need to do at each stage of development. We work out what the KPI needs to be at the end of a phase. So we don't use like gold or gold master or beta or alpha, all those kind of things. We use day 1, day 7, day 14. Okay, so what do we need to get those numbers? And that really forces us to think about every game in a very different way and having a whole checklist that goes, oh, here's what you have to have for your data. Here's what you have for your DevOps. This is what you need to set up a live op event. Is what you need to set up a promotion. I think taking the time to not just think about what the game is, but how the game fails and how you stop it from failing, and then building processes to support that framework, that is, to me, a really important part of resilience. Does that make sense?
100%. And, you know, just building on top of your start point as well, and coming back to that, the fundamental thing to drive home here is that resilience is, as it manifests, it appears as being able to, in the worst in the worst circumstances, when things are going wrong, being able to get through that. But true resilience was built long before you got to that stage. I'm just going to use Weather the Storm again. If you think about a resilient boat, the resilient boat is not the boat that gets through the stormy seas and the hailstorm or whatever. But it is long past the point at which that boat was built when it's facing that situation. That resilience had to be woven into the structure long before, in designs and planning and how it was created. And a huge part of that is just the consideration of everything. Is, you know, somebody at some point had to think, what happens if this boat meets a wave that's bigger than it, and had to build that into the boat that was being made, and hope that when it came against that wave, that it worked out. And exactly to your point is questions like, how did we go wrong? Forces people to consider those stones and work them backwards. Like, oh, you know, it never found its audience. Okay, how could it have not found its audience? Do we know what the audience is? Kind of isn't a good answer.
Well,
okay,
do we know what the audience is? How do you attract them? So we were with the Rocky Horror game that we made. We didn't get the playability right, but we didn't find out that we hadn't got the playability right because finding that audience proved to be problematic. Because the Rocky Horror audience is basically 10% of everybody. There's no other clear differentiating factor that you can use to find them. You know, it's a kind of just one of those things. I think understanding who your audience is and where you find them is as much a part of the design job as then how you understand what they want out of a game and how they'll play a game, and then how you deliver excitement and joy. Anyway.
One thing I will note actually on this, which I think is an important, it's kind of a reverse point. It's looking at resilience. Is a small danger with what we're saying is that it can be very easy to get into what is known as perfection paralysis.
Oh, yes.
Which is the idea that of resilience, and we're saying turn over every stone, find every problem, and do that kind of thing, and it's true, and hopefully hopefully you should and do as much as you can, but that cannot be at the expense of doing anything, because the other side of it is that one thing that could kill your project is never actually building it in the first place, and the danger with asking lots and lots of questions is you've never actually start on building the thing. And so what we're trying to intimate here is that to go into decision making and development without really thinking about intentionally trying to externalize what am I building, why am I building it, what could go wrong, how am I going to approach that, how am I dealing with that, that's a big problematic. But there's also a point at which you can and this is part of experience, of part of doing it lots and lots of times, and killing your darlings and doing game jams and making lots of games to learn the level at which you go, okay, I'm feeling pretty prepared right now to make something, and judging when that point is tough. But if you sit, it's not over planning. You can plan forever. You could plan until you've got the absolute perfect plan, you think, and then it will still go wrong, because that's life.
I think again, this is where I think you can learn from the kind of hyper casual model, whatever kind of game you're making. So we put games actually live in early access spaces as soon as we can, physically, as soon as there's anything that you can put there, because I don't want to make a decision based on my opinion. I want to see what actually happens. The risk is that if you put it on live, then people see it, and then you don't get the halo effect when you do the launch. And the technique for me that I'm learning is spend as little as possible so you don't burst the reach, but keep it live and keep responding and managing the experience. As long as the game continues to feel alive, hopefully you can make, that's manageable. But it's an interesting one. I think ship it is a phrase that really matters, and we used to joke about it at PlayStation. Hugh, an old mate of mine who I used to actually knew back in the old dial-up modem days, Hugh was constantly saying ship it, like, and we're talking about an environment where to ship anything on PlayStation Home, we had to go through 16 weeks of QA from the Japanese team. It was ridiculous amount of QA, completely unnecessary, completely inappropriate. However, that was the environment because we were doing online in PSN. Therefore, there were several tiers of sign-up. These things happen. You adapt your systems to it. But even then, we were trying to do what testing we could. So I couldn't update the platform, but I could get half a dozen people in a room in Great Marble Street and have them play the game and watch them play it. So I could do something. And getting data onto. But I'm going to go a little bit more on the thing you said earlier, that you build the ship, and it's in the integrity of the ship, the material of the ship, that proves its provenance. I totally agree with that. But obviously the ship is the team. And I think, we talked about it earlier, trust is important. And, that definitely applies for the management. I think, the people you recruit and hire, and empowering them to feel like they own the experience, that they can make those decisions, like we said it before. But I think to make that happen, you've got to have T-shaped people as a phrase that, again, is very corporate. But a T-shaped person means they can do lots of things broadly, but they can do some things deeply. They can do one thing deeply, but they can do lots of things broadly. Really important for a startup kind of mentality, that you've got people who really understand, but also making them feel that they're involved in those decisions. I think one of the things that we feel we've done well is we have quarterly strategy meetings where everybody sits down, we talk through some specific area of the business, we take the actions that come out of that, and we do something about it. We don't just talk about it, we actually assign people to do something to fix the thing that was identified. And I think that ownership, that ability to sort of make people feel like they own the fact that what could go wrong, well, they can fix it. I think that's about resilience as well. So if you end up with like someone like me who's been there, done that, got the T-shirt, it'd be so easy to just let me rant on. Nothing. That would be terrible. That wouldn't be an effective company. I have to be able to let other people bring them there, because you can't do everything. You can't control and dictate. What's the phrase? The more you clench your fingers, the more starships. Star systems fall through your fingers. Anyway, something like that.
Yeah. One, I enjoy your rants, so that's a separate point. But two, to combine actually two of the things you said there, which is the point about the ownership, but also the point about hyper casual games, is thinking about the resilience of things, especially when I'm thinking about the resilience of the ship. Actually, the heart of resilience is preparedness for things to go. But actually, like we talked about, it's answering questions, and those answers come from. Sometimes it comes from knowledge, but sometimes it comes from the thing having gone wrong in the past and knowing that is the wrong path. And which is why when you're developing and when you're making anything or building a team, you will hit questions that you do not have an answer to. And what you want to do is be able to answer them. And this is where the hyper casual comes in, because if you hit, the classic question of, okay, we've got a prototype mechanic. Is it fun? Is it fun?
Yeah.
If you've not answered that really, really early on, you could get, and games very much have got 2, 3, 4 years and millions of pounds into development and then gone, wait, is this actually any fun? And then they've given it to people and the people have gone, no, it's not fun. And the game's collapsed. But having...
That's how I made a career out of consulting.
but
number of games I ended up killing off.
But this is that core of going, if you can answer questions with the smallest amount of consequence, then you can answer questions earlier and build resilience in. Because that ship, and to take back to the ship analogy, the reason that ship can now weather that storm is probably because someone at some point built a ship that did not weather that storm. It got destroyed. And they looked at it after the fact and they analyzed it and they went, right, well, the reason that happened is because of this. And that person now knows that. And when it comes up again, the question is, how do we build a ship to weather that storm? That person goes, well, I've built a ship that didn't weather that storm. So let me tell you all the things I got wrong. And that is so true for games, is approaching it with that perspective of, if you don't know the answer, then you need to find a way to answer it as simply as possible. But a lot of the times, those answers come from knowing which answer is the wrong answer, not knowing.
It's kind of funny you say all that, because I was listening to the radio the other day. Yes, I am old. I listen to radio occasionally. And Syrian Livingston was on, and he used the kind of the phrase that I think I've heard lots of people say, but I thought it was quite funny him saying it. Failure is just success as a work in progress.
Yeah, that's a very good way of summarizing it.
I think the point for me, I suppose, is that we need to try and enjoy the fact that I think we're super lucky that we get to work in something that is an art form that is unique, that's about the autonomy of the audience. We can tell stories in ways that no other medium can tell. We can make people feel empowered. You can make people feel, help people feel competent. Satisfy their need to complete actions in ways that the real world won't let them, and be able to show their identity and do things in deliberate ways. That's an amazing gift that we have, and we get to play with it. We get to play and tinker with the world around us. We get to be kind of micro gods, if you like, of our own universes. And I love that. I mean, as somebody who loves playing with narrative, and I'm not good at art, but I'm understanding that I like other people's art. I like mechanics. That's kind of joy in that. But when you bring a team together who have all the skill sets, I mean, how many experiences, how many processes of work have so many skill sets? Psychology, commercialism, the art of physical art, 3D and 2D, and usability, the science and technology of computing, the practicalities of physicality, of using controllers, of using cameras, all of these things that we get to play with. There's nothing like it out there, and I think we've got to remember that joy and be able to just think, okay, what can we do with this? What can we do with it now? How can we ship it now? What's the quickest route to getting something out? So we can do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. But if we don't do that while learning, if we don't do that by paying attention to why we're doing it, by asking the questions, who we're doing it for, how can we possibly be resilient?
We just want for ourselves and everybody else to be unbelievably successful and everyone to make
Yep.
loads of money.
Yes.
And be able to do this in the way that we want to do this for as long as possible. And what that comes down to is really make a point of considering what you're doing, because the more you think about it, and even just sitting and thinking about it and trying to answer the question in your own head, I make a big point of I know that I am better at things when I externalize them. When I talk to people about them, my brain clicks in and goes, "Did you think of that before? Have you actually considered?" And then you're going, "Oh, I haven't thought of that." And the more, it's almost like I should do a podcast. The more that happens, the more you share and think and talk and go about it, the better you will be at going, "Hey, wait a minute, let me do it this way. Well, let me do it that way." And the better game developer and designer you be, the better games you'll make. And the more you get to keep making games. And that's ultimately what we're all here for, is to make some really cool, resilient games that let us all make more games.
Fantastic. That's been great. I'm going to kind of finish off with like 2 phrases from Mythbusters that I love that I think sum this all up. First one is failure is always an option.
Yep, for sure.
And secondly, the only difference between science and screwing around is writing things down.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
I love
100%. Make notes, please. Just on everything.
I mean, those 2 things I think are so fundamental to this. We will fail, and we need to prepare for that. We need to plan for that. We need to work with that. But there is no such thing as failure if we're learning. Failing
means you tried.
Adam, thank you so much for that. Is there anywhere that people can get hold of you, or any kind of projects you want to talk about?
Yeah, if you're interested in finding out more about me, you can go to at AdamB1234 on Twitter, or at Auxilium on all the new social medias. Or if you're interested in what I'm doing in terms of work and things, at BetaJester Ltd or www.betajester.co.uk is the best place to go.
Great stuff. Well, I'm available online under the crazy name Athanasius, Athanataeus. I have been having that particular handle since the QuakeNet days. It was an old role-playing game character, and I'm literally that on everywhere, just experimenting with Mastodon as well as the usual Twitters, etc., etc. Obviously, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Please go and carry on the conversation on Discord. We have a fantastic active Discord community. And obviously, you can reach out to us, talk to us. If you're, interested in game dev, there's an amazing bunch of resources out there. And, there's an amazing community of people, particularly the game dev community out there, who desire and are really keen to help you, whatever your background, whatever your needs. Please check it out. And obviously, subscribe, all the other usual stuff. That's what we're here for. Please pay attention, because we really want to listen to you and want to engage with you and make sure we make great games. And so with that in mind, I am going to say thank you very much. This has been your Game Dev London podcast, and we have been your speakers. Thank you very much.